a British soldier spares the life of a wounded enemy, not knowing that man would go on to reshape world history. A woman wakes in the middle of the night, compelled by a force she can't explain, and ends up saving a child's life. And a blocked drain leads to the capture of a serial killer hiding in plain sight. These are plot twists from a thriller. They're all true. Sometimes, the most unbelievable moments in life aren't written by novelists, they're scripted by fate itself. In today's episode, you'll hear 3 mind-blowing true stories where chance, intuition, and darkness collide. Each tale reveals how the smallest decisions, or strangest gut feelings, can ripple into life-altering consequences. These are not just stories, they're real-life reminders that truth can be far stranger and more powerful than fiction. The heroic moment of Henry Tandy during World War I. During the height of World War I, the chaos and horror of the battlefield claimed countless lives, but it was also a place where moments of humanity and unexpected choices could alter the course of history. Henry Tandy, a young British soldier, stood at the heart of one such moment in 1918, a moment that would forever shape his legacy and leave an indelible mark on the world. At the time, Henry was stationed in northern France, deep in the trenches of a brutal war. The air was thick with the smell of gunpowder, blood, and the constant hum of battle. Yet, amidst the violence and destruction, Henry had already earned a reputation as a hero. His bravery had been recognized by his peers and superiors, and he had received accolades for his courage in the face of unimaginable danger. He was, by all accounts, one of the British Army's finest soldiers, yet it wasn't his medals or his commendations that would define him in the annals of history. It was one fateful decision made during a quiet, foggy evening on the front lines. It was September 28th, a long and exhausting day of fighting had come to an end. Henry was perched at the edge of the trench, weary and battle-worn, his rifle resting at his side as he gazed out into the darkening landscape. The mist hung low over the field, shrouding everything in an eerie silence. It was during this stillness, amidst the faint sounds of distant gunfire and the muffled footsteps of his comrades, that Henry noticed a lone figure emerging from the mist. At first, Henry could make out little more than a silhouette, but it was enough to spark his instincts. With a soldier's reflex, he raised his rifle to his shoulder, his eyes narrowing as he peered down the sights. He had seen enough battles to know that danger could come at any moment, from any direction. But this was different. This figure was not charging or taking a defensive stance. It was simply walking, wounded and stumbling towards him. Henry's heart raced as he tried to make sense of the situation. Was this a German soldier attempting to escape, or was it one of his own men, lost in the chaos? The figure's gait was unsteady, and Henry hesitated, unsure whether he was facing an enemy combatant or a fellow soldier, possibly one who had been injured and was now seeking safety. The fog obscured his vision, and the tension in the air was palpable. For a moment, time seemed to slow. As the figure drew nearer, Henry's grip tightened on the rifle, but he did not pull the trigger. He needed to be sure. His heart was heavy with doubt, and in that split second, he realized that the act of pulling the trigger could very well end a life he might not even be certain was his enemy. The soldier continued to approach, closer and closer, and Henry's mind raced. His eyes scanned the field, quickly checking for his comrades or any sign of movement that could give him the clarity he needed. He glanced both ways, hoping to see someone else's face, someone else's opinion in the thickening fog. But there was no one. The soldier stopped, about 30 meters away from Henry, and looked up, his face pale and bloodied. Henry's breath caught in his throat as he stared at the man, the realization beginning to sink in. This wasn't just a nameless soldier, this man was not armed, and there was no aggression in his posture. He wasn't a threat. But Henry had seen enough of war to know that appearances could be deceiving. In that moment, something shifted within Henry. The usual urge to survive, the instinct to kill or be killed, warred with the unexpected compassion that now swelled within him. How could he shoot this man who seemed so helpless, so human in his vulnerability? The fog that enveloped them both seemed to represent more than just the weather. It was a fog of uncertainty, a fog that blurred the lines between right and wrong. With his rifle still aimed, Henry watched as the German soldier, clearly aware of his impending death, did something unexpected. Instead of attempting to flee or defend himself, he simply stood there, staring at Henry with a look that seemed to accept the fate that awaited him. It was as if, in that instant, he knew that he had no power to change the outcome. It was a moment of surrender, a silent understanding that whatever came next was beyond his control. After what felt like an eternity, Henry lowered his rifle. He looked into the soldier's eyes and made a split-second decision that would alter the course of history. He chose to spare the man's life. Without a word, the German soldier nodded in silent gratitude, and then, as quickly as he had appeared, he turned and disappeared into the mist, vanishing from sight. The soldier Henry had just saved was none other than Adolf Hitler, a man who would later rise to become one of history's most notorious figures. That brief encounter on the battlefield, a single act of mercy in the midst of war, would forever shape the trajectory of the 20th century. What could have been a moment lost in the fog of time became a defining moment in both Henry's life and, perhaps, in the course of world history. Henry Tandy's decision, a simple act of mercy, remained largely unknown for years. But as history unfolded, the realization that this encounter involved Hitler himself added a layer of complexity to the story. Could this small moment of kindness, this act of humanity, have changed the future? Could one soldier's hesitation to pull the trigger have prevented the suffering that Hitler would later bring to millions? It's a question that has haunted historians, and it speaks to the strange, often unpredictable ways in which history is shaped. In the end, Henry Tandy's legacy was not built on medals or accolades, but on the profound moral decision he made during one of the darkest chapters of history. His story, like so many others, reminds us that even in the face of unimaginable violence, there is room for compassion. And sometimes, the greatest acts of heroism come not from the battlefield, but from the quiet, unspoken choices that alter the course of lives, both the lives of those who make them and the lives of those who will never know what might have been. Deborah Hoyt's unexplainable experience and the missing woman. Deborah Hoyt had always considered herself a rational person, someone who made decisions based on reason and logic. But on that one seemingly ordinary night in 1994, something happened that defied any rational explanation. It was a night that would become a turning point in her life, one that blurred the lines between the tangible world she knew and something much more mysterious, something she could not comprehend. Deborah, along with her husband, had been staying at her relative's house in Sacramento, California. It was meant to be a short visit, a couple of days at most. Nothing about the evening felt out of the ordinary at first. Deborah had been spending time with family, sharing stories, and enjoying a peaceful moment away from the routine of her own life. The house was warm, the conversation light, and the evening passed as it usually would. But then, as Deborah lay in bed, something strange began to stir within her, a feeling, something almost like a physical sensation, that grew stronger with each passing minute. It started small, like a faint whisper at the back of her mind, but it quickly escalated into an overwhelming urge. Deborah couldn't explain it, and she couldn't ignore it. There was a deep, gnawing feeling in her chest that told her she had to leave. Now. It was as if the room itself was pressing down on her, urging her to act. She turned to her husband, shaking him gently, trying to make sense of the panic she felt rising in her throat. "We need to leave," she said, her voice trembling. "Right now." "I don't know why, but something's wrong." Her husband, groggy from sleep, dismissed her concern. "You're probably just having a bad dream. It's late. Just go back to sleep, everything's fine." But Deborah couldn't let it go. The sensation wasn't just a passing thought, it was an undeniable force pulling at her. She tried to calm herself, rationalize the feeling, but it wouldn't fade. The unease in her gut only grew stronger. Without fully understanding why, she insisted they leave immediately. "I can't explain it," she said, her voice now urgent. "But I have to go. Please, we need to leave." Reluctantly, her husband agreed. They hurriedly packed their things and slipped out of the house, leaving a note behind for the relatives. As they drove away from the familiar warmth of their temporary home, the tension did not dissipate. Instead, it seemed to hang in the air, thick and unshakable. Deborah couldn't shake the feeling that something terrible was about to unfold. As they drove through the winding roads of the mountains, the night became increasingly oppressive. The darkness seemed to close in around them, and the quiet of the night was broken only by the sound of their tires on the road. Deborah sat tensely in the passenger seat, glancing out of the window at the passing landscape. It was then that she saw it, off to the side of the road, near a bend, something that caught her eye. At first, it appeared to be just another piece of debris, perhaps a bag or a bundle of clothing, but as they drew closer, Deborah's heart stopped. There, lying motionless on the side of the road, was the body of a woman. At first, Deborah's thoughts raced. Could she be alive? Could someone be in need of help? But the woman's position, the stillness of her form, left no room for doubt. This was no ordinary sighting, it was something deeply unsettling. Deborah's breath quickened, and her stomach turned. "I just saw a dead woman on the side of the road," she whispered to her husband, her voice shaking. Her husband was already driving past the body, but Deborah felt a surge of fear wash over her. She wasn't sure why, but she instinctively knew that stopping could be dangerous. "Don't stop," she urged. "It's a trap. Someone's put her there to lure us in. Keep going." Her husband hesitated, his instincts telling him to stop, to check if they could help. But Deborah's urgent voice was impossible to ignore. "No, keep going," she insisted, her fear rising to the surface. "We have to call the police." It wasn't long before they came across a ranger station. Deborah immediately called the police, explaining what she had seen. The dispatcher advised them to stay in the car and wait. Moments later, the police arrived, ready to investigate. They asked Deborah to guide them back to where she had seen the body, and they set off together, driving back to the area where she had spotted the woman. As they reached the spot, Deborah's nerves were on edge. She knew exactly where the body should be, but when they arrived, the area was empty. The police looked around, using flashlights to scan the area, but there was no sign of the woman. "There's nothing here," the officers told Deborah. "No body, nothing out of the ordinary." Deborah was stunned. She knew what she had seen. "I swear, I saw her right here," she said, her voice filled with disbelief. The police, though polite, couldn't do much more. They assured her they would continue looking but advised her to go home. But something about this encounter didn't sit right with Deborah. As she and her husband drove back down the road, she couldn't shake the feeling that the events of the night were far from over. It wasn't until the next morning that the police would uncover the full extent of what Deborah had witnessed. A few days later, an officer named Rich Strasser overheard a conversation about the missing woman and the body that Deborah had seen. The officer recalled a missing persons report for a woman named Christine Skubish, who had gone missing in the area a few days earlier. Christine had been traveling with her young son, Nick, and they had been reported missing. As Rich began to piece the details together, he felt a sudden unease. Could the woman Deborah had seen be Christine? The investigation quickly escalated, and Rich set out to retrace the route Deborah had taken. When he arrived at the same location, he found a children's shoe near the roadside. As he followed the trail, his suspicion deepened. He eventually came across a wrecked car, a red sedan, partially hidden among the trees. Inside, he found Christine's body, but more shockingly, he discovered that her son, Nick, was still alive, though barely. The child had been without food or water for 5 days, and doctors later said that if Rich had not found him when he did, the child would not have survived much longer. The mystery of the woman on the side of the road was finally solved. Christine Skubish had died in the crash, but in her final moments, she had somehow managed to climb out of the car and drag herself to the roadside, where she hoped to be found. Deborah's strange, unexplainable urge to leave the house, to drive through the mountains that night, had led her to the exact spot where Christine's body lay. It was as though some unseen force had guided her there, leading to the rescue of a child who might have otherwise perished. The events surrounding that night left Deborah forever changed. She could never explain the feeling that drove her to leave her relative's house, nor could she fully grasp the eerie coincidence that led her to Christine's body. But one thing was certain, the strange forces that shaped that night had a profound impact on the lives of those involved, and the rescue of little Nick Skubish seemed like something more than mere fate. it was as if some greater power had intervened. Deborah never forgot the strange feeling that had compelled her to act, and the memory of that night stayed with her for the rest of her life, a reminder of the mysterious forces at work in the world around us. Dennis Nilsen and the gruesome discovery at Cranley Gardens. Dennis Nilsen, a name that now evokes terror in the hearts of many, was not always viewed through the lens of his horrific crimes. He was once an unremarkable man, seemingly blending in with the masses, living a life that appeared to be no different from any other. But beneath the surface, there lurked a darkness so profound, it would forever change the course of history. Nilsen's descent into infamy began with the discovery of human remains in a seemingly ordinary drain at Cranley Gardens, North London. What seemed like a mundane plumbing issue quickly spiraled into one of the most chilling investigations in British criminal history. It was a routine day for a local plumber, called to fix a drainage issue at a residential property. As he worked his way through the pipes, he made a gruesome discovery: human remains. Shocked and disturbed, the plumber immediately alerted the authorities, setting in motion a chain of events that would uncover the terrifying truth about the man who lived in the house, the man who was responsible for the horrifying remains. What followed was a detailed unraveling of the dark and twisted actions of Dennis Nilsen, a man whose crimes were not just horrific in their brutality, but also in their sheer audacity. Nilsen was arrested on February 9, 1983, but his reign of terror had begun years earlier, spanning the late 1970s and early 1980s. As the investigation into the discovery at Cranley Gardens unfolded, the authorities realized that Nilsen had been living among them, quietly disposing of his victims with shocking efficiency. He was a master of deception, capable of evading suspicion for years while carrying out unspeakable acts. Nilsen's crimes, which ranged from strangulation to dismemberment, were not crimes of passion. They were the cold and calculated actions of a man who found satisfaction in the power he held over his victims. In total, Nilsen confessed to killing 15 young men, although it is believed that there could have been more victims. His modus operandi was disturbingly methodical. He would invite his victims, usually men he met at pubs or on the streets, back to his apartment, where he would strangle them. Afterward, Nilsen would dismember the bodies, sometimes keeping the remains in his home for months, even years. The grisly details of Nilsen's crimes were truly horrifying, but it was his ability to blend in with society that made his actions all the more terrifying. He was not the stereotypical image of a murderer. Nilsen was soft-spoken, polite, and charismatic, traits that allowed him to deceive those around him and go unnoticed for years. One of the most chilling aspects of Nilsen's behavior was his lack of remorse. During his trial, he openly admitted to his crimes, recounting them with a disturbing detachment. Nilsen had a fascination with death, and it was this obsession that drove him to commit his acts of violence. He would often talk about the sense of control and satisfaction he felt after killing, as though he were playing God with the lives of others. This level of detachment and his apparent inability to see the humanity in his victims made his actions all the more grotesque. The discovery at Cranley Gardens was just the beginning of Nilsen's unraveling. As the investigation progressed, the authorities learned about his previous crimes and the extent of his depravity. The remains found in the drain were just a small part of the larger puzzle that slowly came together. The bodies Nilsen had kept, sometimes for months, were meticulously dismembered, and the way in which he disposed of them showed a level of thought and planning that shocked even the most experienced investigators. The case became one of the most high-profile in British criminal history, with Nilsen's trial making headlines around the world. Nilsen's psychological profile added another layer of complexity to the case. Experts described him as a man with deep-seated psychological issues, including narcissism and a desire for power. He had a compulsive need to control the lives of others, which was reflected in the way he manipulated his victims into trusting him before ultimately taking their lives. Despite the brutality of his actions, Nilsen appeared to show little emotion during his arrest and subsequent trial, further cementing his status as one of the most chilling serial killers of the 20th century. The impact of Nilsen's crimes was far-reaching. It not only exposed the dark underbelly of London's gay community, which Nilsen often preyed upon, but it also raised questions about how a man could live among people for so long without being detected. His ability to blend in and his unremarkable appearance led many to believe that such a person could never be capable of committing such horrific acts. But Nilsen proved them wrong, reminding the world that evil can sometimes be hidden in plain sight. The ultimate horror of the Cranley Gardens discovery was not just the discovery of human remains but the realization that a man like Dennis Nilsen, living in such close proximity to others, had been able to carry out his atrocities without raising suspicion for so long. The case shocked the nation, leaving a lasting scar on the public consciousness. Nilsen was eventually convicted of 6 counts of murder and 2 counts of attempted murder, but it is widely believed that the true extent of his crimes may never be fully known. Nilsen's disturbing ability to disguise his true nature for so long was a testament to the darkness that can lurk in the most unsuspecting individuals. His legacy is one that will not be forgotten, as the horrifying details of his actions continue to be a point of discussion in both criminal psychology and the study of serial killers. Nilsen's tale serves as a cautionary reminder of the monsters that can hide behind ordinary facades, and the terrifying truths that can emerge from the most unlikely places. The world we live in is filled with the unexpected, the strange, and the unpredictable. As we journey through life, we often find ourselves encountering events that defy reason, moments that challenge our understanding of reality. From the bizarre stories we've explored, it's clear that life is never as straightforward as we might hope or imagine. The paths we walk on are often twisted by fate, coincidence, and sometimes, a hidden force that we cannot explain. Throughout this article, we've looked at 3 unbelievable yet undeniably real stories, each offering a glimpse into the complexity of our world. Whether it's the serendipitous meeting between Henry Tandy and a German soldier during World War I, the uncanny experience of Deborah Hoyt that led to a child's rescue, or the chilling discovery of human remains at Cranley Gardens that unearthed a serial killer's gruesome secrets, each narrative underscores the unpredictability of fate. These stories are not just isolated incidents, but rather threads in a larger, more mysterious tapestry, one that we are all part of. Each of these events invites us to ponder the role of fate and coincidence in shaping our lives. In Henry Tandy's story, for example, the sheer chance of meeting a wounded soldier under such dire circumstances could have resulted in a tragic end. Yet, his act of mercy would go on to change history in ways no one could have predicted. Deborah Hoyt's strange urge to leave her relative's house led to a discovery that not only uncovered a hidden tragedy but also saved a child from certain harm. These moments of unpredictability make us question the forces at play around us. Are they truly random, or is there something more at work? Dennis Nilsen's crimes further deepen the mystery of how the most horrifying events can be hidden in plain sight. How could a man like Nilsen, a soft-spoken and seemingly harmless individual, have lived among the community, unsuspected, for so long while committing his atrocities? The discovery at Cranley Gardens was not just the unearthing of a killer's deeds, but the revelation of a darker truth about the world we live in. What else is there beneath the surface that we cannot see? It is this very unpredictability that makes our world so fascinating. We often walk through life thinking we have control, that we understand the patterns and rules that govern our existence. But then, something happens, an event, a twist of fate, that forces us to reconsider everything we thought we knew. It's these moments of uncertainty that remind us of the vast unknown that surrounds us. And perhaps, it's this very uncertainty that makes life so incredibly intriguing. As we reflect on these stories, we're left with an overwhelming sense of wonder and curiosity. How much of what we experience is driven by fate, by coincidence, or by unseen forces? What other strange, untold stories are out there, waiting to be discovered? These questions may never be fully answered, but one thing is certain: the world we live in is far stranger and more mysterious than we can ever truly comprehend. So, let us remain curious, always searching for the truth, even in the most unexpected places. After all, the most incredible stories are often the ones that defy our understanding, those that challenge our perceptions and invite us to see the world through a different lens.